Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating macro to micro journey together. We are going to trace a direct line from intense international diplomacy, high-stakes military operations, and global trade corridors, straight down to something you feel literally every single week, your wallet. It's a pretty striking look at how global dominoes fall. And by looking at the best images painted by some very telling words from our leaders, by the end of this, you're going to see exactly how an event halfway across the world dictates the cost of your summer road trip. Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap today will logically connect a distant geopolitical conflict right to your local gas station. We'll quickly cover a delicate balancing act, the standoff at the Strait, the rejected deal, plummeting global oil prices, and finally, pain at the pump.
Section 1. A delicate balancing act between home and abroad.
To really understand the global oil market right now, we first have to look at a wildly complex juggling act happening at the executive level over a holiday weekend. Based on our sources, a temporary, quiet pause has actually fallen over the Strait of Hormuz, and the timeline of events tells us exactly why. See, on the first day of what's known as Operation Epic Fury, the late Ayatollah passed away. Because of this, Iranian officials requested a break in negotiations for a couple of days to hold a massive state funeral. And this pause in international negotiations, well, it's happening precisely as domestic celebrations are ramping up in the United States, culminating tonight with the president giving speeches at Mount Rushmore for the 250 celebrations. You can really see this vivid juxtaposition of domestic and foreign responsibilities when you just look at the president's pre-flight schedule. Before even heading to the Mount Rushmore celebrations, the itinerary included 3 distinct policy meetings, followed by 30 minutes of dedicated signing time. Hopefully you didn't get a hand cramp before the flight, right? All before even boarding the plane. It's a prime example of the intense split-focus reality of navigating international tensions while simultaneously managing massive domestic milestones. Moving to Section 2, Standoff at the Strait, Global Choke Point. So while the funeral brought a brief pause, the high-stakes international chess match over the Strait of Hormuz has been incredibly intense. We actually get a very clear picture of the initial optimism surrounding the negotiations by looking at some telling words from the president. The quote reads, "I think they have agreed to just about everything we need." It represents a highly confident assessment of exactly where the United States believed these diplomatic talks were heading. But the words used to describe the actual physical operations in the region, they paint a totally different picture, one of massive logistical scale and tension. The president noted, "We had one night we took 22 ships out. That's a lot of oil. Big ships." These are incredibly telling words. Just imagine the imagery of moving 22 massive oil vessels in a single night. It perfectly encapsulates the sheer volume of global energy resources caught right in the crosshairs of this standoff. We're talking about a staggering amount of physical capital being maneuvered in one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Which brings us to Section 3, the rejected deal, priceless control. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap between optimistic expectations and cold, hard diplomatic reality. When U.S. diplomats formally presented their trade-off, it was heavily focused on financial incentives. The United States offered billions in funds. In exchange, the requirement was for Iran to relinquish its claim to control the Strait of Hormuz and basically renounce all toll payments. But the Iranians said no. Rather than accepting the billions, they calculated that control of the Strait of Hormuz is, quote, priceless. It's a really stark contrast, isn't it? A massive financial offer up against an ideological strategic stance that control over this global choke point simply cannot be bought. Let's look at Section 4, plummeting global oil prices, global markets. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer velocity of the macroeconomic shift resulting from these tensions. It's just staggering. We're shifting our focus away from the diplomatic tables in the Middle East and looking straight at the global markets. The spot price of oil, which, by the way, had previously almost hit the astronomical mark of $150 a barrel, has come dramatically crashing down. According to the data, it's now sitting way down in the 60s. Think about that. That is a massive 50% drop, a 50% plummet in the foundational energy resource of the modern world is an absolute global economic shockwave. When the price of oil literally gets cut in half, it impacts everything. Everything from international shipping to manufacturing costs across the entire globe. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds. Pain at the pump, your wallet. This brings us directly to you and, of course, your wallet. It's the exact question the president's economic team is addressing right now. And honestly, it's almost certainly the question on your mind. Why hasn't a 50% drop in the cost of oil meant a 50% drop in the cost of a gallon of gas? Right? If global oil is suddenly half the price, why in the world aren't you paying half the price when you fill up your car?
So the crucial point here is understanding the mechanics of the energy supply chain. It just doesn't happen overnight. First, the oil spot price drops on the global market, just like we saw with that plunge into the 60s. But then, step 2 kicks in, a 1 to 2 month lag. It takes physical time for the cheaper crude oil to actually be purchased, shipped across the ocean, refined into usable gasoline, and finally distributed. And then finally, in step 3, after that month or two has passed, that's when the percentage change in oil prices speeds through to the local gasoline pumps where you actually swipe your credit card.
Because of this structural lag, the president's economic team actually remains highly optimistic about your wallet for the rest of the summer. The underlying data tells us that this massive 50% drop is currently working its way through the pipeline. What that means is a significant drop in local gas prices is on the horizon. It just takes a month or two for global shifts to become your local reality.